My name is Tom. I've always been a background person. Not in a bad way. I like being in the background. I was that bass player in the jazz band that no one notices, but without whom the whole melody would fall apart. I worked as a book restorer, spending my days in the quiet of the library, breathing in the smell of dust and glue, bringing back to life what others considered dead. My life was quiet, measured, and full of meaning, which I found in the details. My wife, Elena, was my complete opposite. She was a soloist. Bright, loud, ambitious. She worked as an art director in a fashionable gallery and lived in a world of vernissages, bohemian parties, and people whose names were printed in glossy magazines. I was her safe haven, her grounding force. At least, that's what I thought. I supported her in everything. I cooked dinner when she came home late, listened to her stories about quarrelsome artists and brilliant curators, ironed her dresses before important events. I was her reliable, unchanging backdrop. And I was happy in that role. I loved her light, and asked for nothing in return except warmth. I was wrong. It turns out that sometimes the backdrop blends in so much with the scenery that it becomes completely invisible. The party was held in the penthouse of a famous collector. Panoramic windows covering the entire wall, a view of the city at night, champagne flowing like a river, and a buzz of voices mixing art, business, and gossip. I felt like a stranger here, like an old folio on a shelf with modern comics. But I came for Elena. She fluttered around the room like a butterfly, flying from one group of people to another, smiling dazzlingly and reaping the fruits of her success. I was standing at the bar with a glass of water, just watching her, when she approached me arm in arm with a tall, gray-haired man in an expensive suit. It was the collector, the owner of the penthouse. "And by the way, meet Tom," Elena said, waving her hand casually in my direction. Her voice was cheerful and carefree. "We know each other." The man held out his hand to me. "Nice to meet you, Tom. Are you also from the art world?" I froze. My brain refused to process what I had heard. "We know each other." Not, "This is my husband." Not, "This is my beloved." Just, "We know each other." As if I were a random passerby she had bumped into at the entrance. I looked at Elena, searching her eyes for some sign, some mistake, some slip of the tongue. But she was looking at the collector, and her face showed nothing but a social smile. At that moment, I did not exist as her husband. I was a nuisance, an inconvenient detail that was easier to hide than to explain. Public humiliation by a partner can cause a deep sense of shame and worthlessness. It wasn't just a jab. It was a blow with an ice axe to the heart. I felt the blood drain from my face. I muttered something in response to the collector, shook his hand, apologized, and stepped aside. For the rest of the evening, I was a ghost. I wandered around the huge apartment, but no one saw me. Or rather, I didn't want to be seen. I looked at my wife, laughing and shining in the center of the room, and realized that she had just erased me from her life with one careless word. We returned home late. In the taxi, she chattered about how successful the party had been, how the collector had praised her exhibition, how she might get a new project. She didn't notice my silence. Or didn't want to notice. When we entered the apartment, she kicked off her shoes and stretched wearily. "God, I'm so tired. I'm going to pour myself some water. Would you like some?" I didn't answer. I silently walked past her into the bedroom. I took a pillow and a blanket and left. "Where are you going?" she asked in surprise. Again I didn't answer. I went to my study, where I was restoring books, and silently closed the door behind me. I heard her come to the door, stand there for a moment, and then, shrugging her shoulders, go back to the bedroom. She probably decided that I was offended and sulking. So be it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the dark, breathing in the familiar smell of old paper, and a decision was born in me. Cold, clear, and terrifying in its simplicity. She presented me as a casual acquaintance. She made me invisible to others. Well, I'll become invisible to her too. I won't yell. I won't reproach. I won't try to sort things out. arguments, and shouting are a form of interaction. They are an acknowledgement that the other person exists, and that their opinion matters. I was going to completely exclude her from my world. Psychologists call this behavior stonewalling, or withdrawing into oneself. Is the refusal to engage in verbal and nonverbal communication, often used as a defense mechanism. But my plan was more profound. I wasn't just going to remain silent. I was going to disappear while remaining in place. She wanted me to be just an acquaintance. Fine. I would become a ghost in her own home. I woke up early in the morning. I quietly took a shower, got dressed, and made myself some coffee. When Elena entered the kitchen, sleepy and disheveled, I looked up at her. My gaze was empty, polite, and completely indifferent, the way you look at a stranger in an elevator. "Good morning," she said, expecting the usual kiss on the top of her head. I silently finished my coffee, rinsed the cup, and left the kitchen. I could feel her surprised gaze on my back. I spent the whole day in my office. In the evening, when she came home from work, I was making dinner for myself. I made exactly one serving. "Oh, pasta! What about me?" she asked, looking over my shoulder. I silently put the pasta on my plate, sat down at the table, and started eating. I didn't look at her. I didn't answer her. I just ate as if she weren't in the room. For the first couple of days, she seemed to think it was a game. That I was just punishing her for the party. She tried to joke around, pretending that everything was fine. "Wow, are we playing silent treatment today? The first one to speak loses," she said cheerfully on Tuesday evening. I didn't react. I read a book, turning the pages, completely immersed in the text. By Wednesday, her cheerfulness began to give way to irritation. "Tom, this isn't funny anymore. Stop sulking. Okay, I'm sorry, I was wrong. I shouldn't have said that. Let's talk." She stood in front of me, trying to look me in the eyes. I looked up at her, the same empty, indifferent look, and went back to my book. She stormed out of the room, slamming the door loudly. It was the first crack in her armor. By Thursday, the atmosphere in the house had become unbearable. My silence was no longer just an absence of sound. It became palpable. It filled the entire space. It was oppressive. It was suffocating. The feeling of being ignored by a loved one can cause severe stress and anxiety because it attacks a person's basic need for belonging and recognition. Elena began to tiptoe around the house. She stopped trying to talk to me. She just watched me. She watched how I moved, how I ate, how I read. I could feel her gaze, full of a mixture of fear, anger, and incomprehension. On Friday evening, she couldn't take it anymore. I was sitting in the living room when she came in and sat down opposite me. Her hands were shaking. "Please say something," she whispered. Her voice was broken. "Yell at me. Accuse me. Hit me if you want. Just don't be silent. It's torture." I slowly raised my head from the book and looked at her. For the first time in days, I allowed myself to really see her. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes. Her usual confidence had evaporated. But I didn't feel a shred of pity. Only a cold, icy emptiness. I got up silently and went to my office. I heard her burst into tears. The weekend was the culmination of this silent nightmare. We were locked in the same space, and my presence-absence became unbearable for her. She no longer cried. She fell into a kind of apathy. She just sat on the sofa and stared at one spot. The house that had once been our cozy nest turned into a tomb. On Saturday, I started packing my things. I did it quietly, methodically. I packed my books, my clothes, my restoration tools into boxes. She stood in the doorway and watched silently. She didn't ask any questions. She understood everything. On Sunday morning, I carried out the last box. The apartment was almost empty of my belongings. I left everything we had bought together. I only took my own things. I walked over to the kitchen table. She was sitting there, just like yesterday, with an empty cup in her hands. I took my apartment key out of my pocket. the only key I had. And I put it on the table in front of her. The metallic sound in the deafening silence sounded like a gunshot. I looked at her one last time. She looked up at me, her eyes full of tears and despair. "Tom," she whispered. It was the first word she had spoken in 2 days. I turned around and walked out the door without looking back. I didn't lock it. I don't know how long she sat at the table, staring at the key. Maybe an hour. Maybe the whole day. I rented a small apartment on the other side of town. I unpacked my books and set up my tools. And for the first time in a week, I felt the tension leave me. I was breathing. And she remained there, in our former apartment, alone with the silence I had created. But now that silence was not my weapon. It had become her reality. She was left alone in an empty space that had previously been filled with my quiet presence. She got what she seemed to want, the life of a soloist, without a backing band. But it turned out that without a background, the soloist was lost in the void. She made me invisible, and I simply materialized her desire. I disappeared. And now she was surrounded by a deafening emptiness, in which the only words spoken at that party echoed. A month later, she received divorce papers in the mail. There was not a single unnecessary word in them. Only dry legal wording. No explanations. No accusations. After all, ghosts don't write letters. They just disappear.